CNBC to reflect on his DOGE experience to date. He had this to say about the impact his DOGE profile had on his businesses, starting with Tesla.
Your work at DOGE, for example, was that worth it? You know, to the extent you are now, Elon, you were a somewhat divisive figure 2 years ago, but now you really are. I mean, there are people who love you, but there are a lot of people who dislike you, some of whom were your customers. And I wonder, was it worth the undertaking at DOGE and everything else that you've done and how outspoken you've been in terms of the things you believe in to antagonize so many potential buyers and or users of things like a robo-taxi?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, what I've learned is that legacy media propaganda is very effective at making people believe things that aren't true.
What would an example of that be?
That I'm a Nazi, for example.
Right.
And how many legacy media publications, talk shows, whatever, try to claim that I was a Nazi because of some random hand gesture at a rally where all I said was that my heart goes out to you, and I was talking about space travel.
Legacy media propaganda smearing has a big impact. Yeah. I think we just spent the first hour and a half of this show talking about it. It can go in both directions. They're a sword or a shield for who they choose. And who do they choose? Well, it's based on ideology and political party affiliation. Right. It's the same thing Elon Musk experienced in the negative. Joe Biden was the beneficiary of. It's the same thing. It's the same story that repeats itself because the storytellers repeat themselves. But he had this to say about controversies that were used as sort of the representations of DOGE's work, starting with the first one out of the box, really, USAID.
As you start to transition now back to Tesla in a more significant way, was it worth it?
Yeah, first of all, any program in USAID that had any semblance of merit was retained and folded into the State Department. So, and if there's some exception to that, we're all ears and we'd love to look at it. We just want to see the evidence that the program was actually doing good and not just funding graft in D.C. and warlords in some country. Because over and over again, we saw so sympathetic sounding programs.
Right.
But when we actually said, well, please show us pictures of the recipients of the aid, or let us get into contact with them. No pictures were forthcoming. They didn't give us any contact information. And we're like, look, we're not going to send money to D.C. grafters and warlords. That's not a good use of money. So that's not what we're going to do. Now, invariably, when you stop waste and fraud, it's not like the fraudsters admit their guilt. They don't say like, oh, isn't it so great that the money we were getting, fortunately, has been stopped. They will obviously come up with a sympathetic sounding claim that claim has no merit.
Yeah, and the fraudsters and then the flacks for the fraudsters, like the neo-Marxist members of Congress, that will do the same. By the way, a related story, USAID, a British man, Stephen Paul Edmund Sutton, pled guilty for participation in a USAID fraud scheme perpetrated when he was employed by a contracting firm that implemented a USAID power distribution program in Pakistan. Good oversight. Sutton pleaded guilty to conspiring to commit theft concerning a program receiving federal funds, which is a felony. In his role as a logistics operations manager, Sutton took kickbacks of USAID funds used to pay for the services rendered. Right. And he's the only one in the federal government that engage in illicit personal enrichment. I suppose you would get in response from the neo-Marxists. Of course, when you throw trillions of dollars around, there's going to be some waste, fraud, and abuse. And I'm against the waste, fraud, and abuse, but only theoretically. I don't want to do anything structurally to change anything that would prevent or reduce the waste, fraud, and abuse, and that's what Elon Musk ran into. And frankly, what we all continue to run into based on the big, beautiful bill that is making its way to the president's desk. For more on all this, pleased to be joined by Jim Iuorio, host of the Future's Edge podcast, special contributor to WirePoints, wirepoints.org, all things Illinois policy related, and the proprietor of Brandt's Restaurant in Palatine. Jim, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
What would you say to the question about that was put to Elon Musk? Was it worth it? From our perspective, was it worth it to have Elon ride point and take all that heat rather than, continue to push to the frontiers of space and technology with his companies and employ many thousands more, focus on those businesses?
So with the Musk story, it all starts. Look, he ran afoul of the propagandist media when he bought Twitter and allowed two sides of the story. Remember, they didn't want any pushback on any of their idiotic ideas, and he was the one who stood up and said, well, this is stupid. I've had, friends, people within the finance business who posited theories back in 2020 and 2021 and were immediately kicked off Twitter, things about the vaccine, things about the pandemic, air quotes, and they were kicked off Twitter because we couldn't discuss it. And Elon Musk comes around and says, no, it should be a two-sided debate. So guess who doesn't like that? People whose debate points are absolutely stupid, and that was the most of the fringe left. So as soon as he did that, he became a bad guy. Then why did he throw himself in with Donald Trump? Because remember, they were trying to put him in jail. They were trying to take his company away. They were using the same sort of lawfare against Elon Musk as they were using against Donald Trump. So is it worth it for our country? It is absolutely 100% worth it. Without two-sided discussion on social media, a lot of the people wouldn't, have woken up to some of the ridiculous things that were foisted upon us in 5 years ago. So is it worth it for him? I hope so. I mean, that stock, I did buy some of that stock when it was beaten down. And again, I'm not telling anyone to buy a stock because I don't know your risk tolerance, but I did buy the Tesla stock when it was beaten down because it was beaten down for all the wrong reasons. Tesla's a pretty amazing company, and you're going to all sell it because a bunch of fringe lunatics are burning car lots? That made no sense to me.
Yeah, well, and how has it performed since you bought it?
Yeah, are you taking us to dinner this weekend, this Memorial Day?
I'd say.
What was the question, Amy?
I said, are you taking Dan and I to dinner this weekend?
Sure, absolutely. Come Saturday. Saturday I'm going downtown to the Paul Simon concert. But if Friday come out, I'll buy you dinner at France.
Paul Simon. Is Garfunkel back yet?
What's that?
Is Garfunkel back yet?
Hold it. You're not going to disparage Paul Simon. The guy's put out a lot of good music for the last however many years. The guy deserves my $100 ticket or whatever much it costs. I'm sure tickets cost a lot more than that, but I didn't buy them.
Is Edie Brickell we're opening for him?
Is he still married to Edie Brickell?
I guess. I
you know what? I'm going to Google that.
I don't know.
Sorry, I shouldn't.
No.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Where's the venue? Where's Paul Simon performing?
He's at the Chicago Symphony Center, which I had never heard of. Have you guys?
Oh,
yeah. I've heard of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's nice. That's good. It's a good venue.
Yes, they're still married.
Well,
He's been married to her since 1992.
It's wonderful.
Wow.
I thought you guys would learn some pop culture today.
Give Paul and Edie our regards this weekend, Jim.
For sure.
Yeah. Ray Dalio, Bridgewater billionaire, big hedge fund guy, talking about the Moody's downgrade. Now, again, this is, as we talked about with Jeannie Ives, I think on yesterday or Friday, I can't remember. But, the rating agencies have their own problems and corruption. So the Moody's downgrade, I'm not hysterical about, but Dalio says this about debt downgrade. Credit ratings understate credit risk because they only rate the risk of the government not paying its debt. They don't include the greater risk that the countries in debt will print money to pay their debts, thus causing holders of bonds to suffer losses from the decreased value of the money they're getting rather than from the decreased quantity of money they're getting. Said differently, for those who care about the value of their money, the risks for U.S. government debt are greater than the rating agencies are conveying. Do you concur?
Well, so I like that he said something that's important. I wrote about this a couple of days ago. Moody's they said they downgraded U.S. Treasury debt, but that's asinine. If you hold U.S. Treasury debt, you're always going to get paid back, whether they create more dollars to do it or not. You're always going to get paid back the dollars you owe. But you might get paid back in a cheaper currency if they just keep printing dollars to pay their debt. So I like the way he said that too. Now the thing with Moody's. Okay, if you look at us, let's go even back 2 years when they were passing that asinine Inflation Reduction Act, which was one of the biggest spending bills I've ever seen, and they were accruing debt at a rate of $1 trillion every 95 days, accruing debt. And then Moody's was fine with that. They didn't say anything about that now. Now that we're all of a sudden trying to get us back on a track, which, by the way, I thought the deficits were going to be bigger in 2025 because tax cuts and deregulation usually don't start to filter into the greater economy for about a year or so. So I think 2025 is going to be a tough year. But it's the only choice we had to try to get back on a path that wasn't leading us directly toward the rocks at 100 miles an hour. And we were doing that from a debt standpoint before. You can't rack up that sort of debt. Now, the last thing I'd say about Moody's is that we're talking about U.S. Treasury debt here, which is the most analyzed by the top minds over the globe every day on a daily basis. To think that Moody's can pop in at the end and say, "Oh yeah, we're downgrading U.S. debt," who do they think they are? They're all loaded with second-rate intellects who couldn't get a job at the big hedge funds that are actually rating this stuff every day. So we're not very, very interested in what Moody's had to say, and that's why you can see that the stock market rallied the day after Moody's downgraded us. Treasuries didn't really do very much; they were already kind of a little bit on a downward trajectory. Does any of that make sense?
It does. I mean, Moody, as you say, Moody's had no problem with Bidenomics, which
none,
right, and they had. A pluses across the board for all the subprime lenders before the 08-09 crash. And
I should have thrown that in. Amen to that. Yeah,
right. So I mean, it's more like that because they still have a brand in certain circles. It's more the conversation it generates about the lack of real spending reductions in what is being proposed from congressional Republicans, and what that portends right now for this continuing to build upon the $36 trillion and $100 trillion plus debt and $100 trillion plus of unfunded liabilities.
Right. I agree with them on that. I am disappointed in the first 3 months, 4 months, whatever it is of this administration, that there hasn't been any meteor cutbacks made in spending. Like if it was you and I taking over, we would look at this equation and say, you know what, the Defense Department has got to probably get less money, maybe by 10%. Wow. We have to rework a lot of different things, and they have not done those things effectively. So if Moody's is saying they said they were going to cut lots of spending and they've only cut a little bit of spending, and it's still, the deficits are still ballooning, I actually agree with Moody's on that. Not that I asked their opinion. Like I'll say again, there's people who are talking about that all the time. Let the adults talk. You guys just go back and rate mortgage backs as AAA and tell everyone to buy them.
Well, not only they're not cutting defense spending, they want more to build this golden dome over Washington, D.C. How much is that going to cost?
Exactly, and I think that's irresponsible at this point in our history. I think we need to be looking for meaningful cuts, and I don't think they're doing that effectively. That being said, as far as this administration compared to the last one, I think we're miles better. And I don't regret my vote for even a millisecond.
No, but it would
complaints about the way they handle it.
It would have been nice if Musk had said, in terms of the was it worth it question, they said, well, it was worth it because there are things more important to me than money, like the future of this country, which I know he believes. But it is a little disappointing that congressional Republicans are not willing to go farther than they have demonstrated their willingness to go, that they're balking at work requirements for able-bodied men on Medicaid. They're quadrupling the SALT deduction to reward big blue tax and spend states like New York and Illinois and California, and the rich within those states that prop up these terrible politicians and who advance this terrible public policy. I actually, at this point, it's all built into the price. I'd like to see Musk get a little sharper in his rebukes. I put a lot on the line, and I expect more than what House and Senate Republicans are delivering at this point.
There's no question about it. Amen. And the SALT thing, and I agree with you, even though I'm going to obviously be a beneficiary of that, being someone in Illinois. So, selfishly, I was like, okay, pass it. It puts more money in my pocket. But theoretically, it's ridiculous because it absolutely is an enabler of the high tax states. And by the way, those taxes in those states, they will go up effectively if now there's a $40,000, and they won't probably go up to take care of the whole thing, but they will go up.
Yeah, if you subsidize tax increases, you'll get more of them, and that's what we're going to do.
That is exactly what we're doing. So it's a ridiculous thing, too. I like the notion of cutting taxes. By the way, I don't like the notion of cutting taxes on tips. It's the only tax cut that I don't love, because in the service industry, it's one of the last bastions of cash as a means of exchange. And I think if you take away that incentive, you move us a step closer to some central bank digitized currency where they can watch every one of our transactions. So I'm kind of bummed by that a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
No,
That's going to be part of it, to be sure. It already passed out of the Senate, so that's going to get unanimously, no less. So that'll be part of whatever's reconciled between the two chambers. I want to get your reaction to something else too, just because it speaks to our long-term relationship with Europe. This piece in the Wall Street Journal about the tech industry is big, but Europe is a very small part of this big industry. The summary: Europe lacks any homegrown alternatives to the likes of Google, Amazon, or Meta. Apple's market value is bigger than the entire German stock market. The continent's inability to create more big technology firms is seen as one of its biggest challenges and a major reason why its economies are stagnating. Investors and entrepreneurs say obstacles to tech growth are deeply entrenched, a timid and risk-averse business culture, strict labor laws, suffocating regulations, a smaller pool of venture capital, and lackluster economic and demographic growth. Europe is trending towards developing world status, the way this story about their tech sector reads.
Since I'm pulling out the quote again, which I can't remember who said this quote. So if I can't remember for a year, then I'm giving myself credit for it.
Nice.
But the quote is that Europe is a museum, Japan is an old folks' home, and China is a prison, leaving the United States to be the last great alternative, and it still is. Europe, there was I think it was a tire. This is about 10 years ago, and in the Wall Street Journal there was a letter written by a CEO. Someone from France had, someone in their administration had reached out to him about building a factory in France, and he wrote this scathing letter about the French culture, about the regulations, about every hoop you had to jump through, and he was like, "Believe me, there was never any situation where I would bring manufacturing to France or any other European country." I wish I could pinpoint who the guy was, but it's absolutely correct. We think we're a regulatory nightmare. You go to Europe, and it's completely out of control. I think they are just going to live the rest of their next 100 years just on being a tourist destination to talk about how things were 2,000 years ago.
The epitaph of the EU. Jim Iuorio, host of the Future's Edge podcast, special contributor to WirePoints, wirepoints.org, and the proprietor of Brandt's Restaurant in Palatine. Is going to have some unhappy waitstaff when they hear about your opposition to tax on tips. I'll tell you that right now. Jim Iuorio, thanks for joining us as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
If you're looking to purchase a new home or refinance your existing home, you need to call Team Hochberg, your trusted local lender. Zeke, self-employed, called to refinance his $1 million home after being rejected by 3 lenders. Zeke contacted me after hearing me explain how I helped another self-employed listener who was also rejected due to lack of income. I helped Zeke secure an $800,000 cash-out refinance using the 12-month average of Zeke's business bank statements. Let's review. Zeke called to refinance